This FOX5, a New York article from just yesterday, January 3rd, 2025, is, well, it's really disturbing. It kind of paints this picture of, just an ordinary day in Harlem, a postal worker doing his route, a deli, people waiting in line, and then things take a really shocking turn, a fatal stabbing over a place in line. It's hard to wrap your head around. How does something so mundane become so tragic?
It's that ordinariness that really gets to me, right? I mean, it's a situation we've all been in, waiting in line, maybe a little impatient, but violence, it's unsettling. Makes you think about how quickly things can change.
For sure, it really does. The article talks about the victim, Ray Hodges, 36 years old, working for the Postal Service. I'm sure he was a familiar face in the neighborhood, just doing his job.
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah, and in broad daylight, too. The article says it happened around 2:3 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
They've named 25-year-old Jaya Cruz as the suspect, facing a second-degree murder charge. They found a knife at the scene.
There's a quote from one of the neighbors, Uzo Gujisachi, that really stood out to me. He said, "It's very scary. Anytime you wake up, anything can happen." I think that really sums up the feeling in the community right now.
It's easy to think of these things as isolated, but I think this speaks to something bigger. We're seeing more and more violence, and we have to look at what's causing it.
I totally agree. It feels like this case is like a microcosm of this bigger issue. The article mentions some of the reader comments, and it's a mix of everything.
Yeah.
Shock, calls for justice, even some fear about this trend of violence.
That range of reactions is really telling, isn't it? It shows how complex this problem is. People want answers, someone to blame, but the reality is these issues run deep. They're not simple.
It's hard to know where to even start with something like this. It's such a horrific act. It's easy to get caught up in the emotion, but I think you're right. We need to look deeper. So what are some of these underlying factors we need to consider?
Well, one thing that really jumps out at me is conflict resolution. Or rather the lack of it, it seems like. Today, disagreements just escalate so quickly. People turn to aggression instead of finding peaceful solutions. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's like we've forgotten how to actually communicate, to listen to each other, try to see things from different perspectives. Everyone's so quick to judge, to get defensive.
Exactly. And I think social media plays a big part here. We're just bombarded with outrage negativity constantly.
Yeah.
And that can desensitize us, make violence seem, well, normal.
Yeah.
Then there's the echo chambers, right? People only see the viewpoints they already agree with. So it's harder to have, a real conversation with someone who thinks differently.
That's a great point. Social media, it's like it's distorting our reality, making it harder to connect with people who don't see things exactly the same way. And it's not just violence, it's everything, right? We're scrolling through tragedy, suffering every day. It's easy to become numb to it all.
You're right. You've hit on something important there. That constant exposure, it can really change us, change our empathy, our ability to deal with our own emotions. There's research showing a link between social media and anxiety, depression, even aggression.
Makes you wonder, is there a connection there between this digital world and the violence we're seeing in real life?
It's a tough question, but
yeah.
But it's one we need to ask. Some experts think that the constant stimulation online, that instant gratification, it can make it harder to deal with, everyday life.
Right. So it's like the frustrations build up and people have a shorter fuse.
Yeah, something like that.
And we can't forget about mental health either. So many people struggling with trauma, anxiety, depression, and that can definitely contribute to aggressive behavior.
Absolutely. Mental health is a huge part of this. When people don't have support, resources to manage their mental well-being, it can come out in different ways: anger, aggression, even violence.
So we're talking about a lot of things here, all connected. Societal pressures, technology, lack of mental health resources. It's a lot to think about.
It is. It's a lot to process. But we have to recognize these connections if we want to move past blame and actually find solutions.
So then what can we do? It's easy to feel, powerless when these problems seem so big.
Yeah, it can feel that way for sure. But like you said before, recognizing the problem is the first step, right? So where do we go from here? How do we, as individuals, actually address these issues? How do we make, a more peaceful society?
It is the big question, isn't it? It's easy to feel overwhelmed, like you said. But I really believe that what we do as individuals matters. It starts with looking at ourselves. How do we react when we're faced with conflict? Do you make it worse?
Right.
Or trying to calm things down? Are we adding to the anger and aggression? Or trying to understand, be empathetic?
That's a good point. It's easy to just react in the moment without thinking. But if we can take a step back, breathe, be more mindful, it can completely change how things go. Exactly. And think about it, it's like a ripple effect. If we all started practicing conflict resolution in our everyday lives, imagine the impact that could have. A disagreement in a deli line. It doesn't have to end in tragedy. We can choose a different path.
So what does that look like, practically speaking? What are some things we can actually do?
Well, we can all learn some basic conflict resolution skills, right? Active listening, empathy, assertive communication. These are all valuable tools. And there's so many resources out there online and communities, workshops, books, even apps to help you develop these skills.
That's great. A good place to start. And I think it's important to remember we don't have to do this alone. We can support each other, share what we're learning, keep each other accountable.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort creating a more peaceful society. We all need to be involved in building a culture of respect, understanding, compassion. And it's not just about avoiding conflict, it's about engaging with it, but in a constructive way.
And speaking of support, what about mental health? We talked about the crisis earlier. What can we do to address that part of the problem?
Well, we need to get rid of the stigma around mental health issues. Create an environment where people feel comfortable asking for help. For insurance coverage, more affordable therapy, more funding for mental health programs in schools and communities.
And just on a personal level, check in on your loved ones. Be there for each other. Offer support without judgment. We can all help create a more supportive, understanding environment.
I couldn't agree more. And it doesn't have to be big, grand gestures, you know. Sometimes it's the small things that matter most. Listening, lending a hand, being patient. These can make a world of difference to someone who's struggling.
This deep dive has really been, well, thought-provoking. It makes you realize how fragile life is and how important it is to choose kindness, empathy, understanding in all our interactions with everyone.
Absolutely. Let this be a moment for all of us to reflect and to act. Let's build a world where a disagreement never escalates into tragedy. A world where connection matters more than conflict, and where every life is valued and protected.